Martin Luther King always said, when God's law bumps up against man's law, I got to go with God's law. Peace, love, harmony, happiness, all those things. And on top of that, the Founding Fathers wrote into the documents that we were supposed to have this. So there's two problems here, and we need to have that justice in our society. So I think the message is, Ted, what's going on in your life? Jonathan, what's going on in your life that you see injustice around you? You see inequality, you see problems. Your one voice can be just as powerful, and it needs to be.
What's going on, guys? Welcome to another episode of The Modern Man. It's a pleasure to have you over here. It's also a pleasure to be here right off of the Saluda River. Can't wait till you find out where we are, but we're going to keep that a secret for a little while longer. I first want to introduce my panelists today. Jonathan Parker joining us to my left.
Always glad to be here. Thanks, guys, for watching.
I'm excited to introduce our guest for today. You're going to love this one. Jeremiah Dew, a.k.a. JDew, in the house. How you doing, brother?
Good to see you, sir. Glad to be here.
Yes, sir. It's a pleasure to have you. We have a great topic for today. Before we jump into the topic, I always love to make sure that our guest has an ability to introduce themselves to our audience. Our audience can get familiar with the guest, find out who they're working with. So why not let people know what you do?
Sure. My name is JDew, and for those of you around the upstate of South Carolina, you may recognize me as the guy from the event, whatever it was. Some man on the mic moment from baseball downtown for a lot of years, Greenville Drive baseball, Clemson basketball. I'm still currently the MC there, and this is the 12th season right now. And a lot of various and sundry things between then. So you can find me at It's JDew, doing my thing for fundraisers and galas and pep rallies and all of that stuff in between. So great to be here on Modern Man.
Absolutely. It's great to have you. And something else you do, which actually kind of meshes perfect with today's topic, is the one voice performance. And I'd like you, I guess, speak about that really quick, the origin of it and what it is, and then we can hop into today's topic, which is the modern mid-century man.
Okay, yeah. So about 10 years ago, 2011, I actually got into a position where I was going to do my first ever debut world premiere of my one-man show. I've been working on it for about 18 months, and I was going to be downtown in Greenville at the Warehouse Theater, professional theater there, and I was going to showcase a narrative of Black history. So there's no commentary. It's not me, JDew, being the performer, but I become Fredrick Douglas, MLK, Muhammad Ali, Barack Obama. So it's 180 years from then till now, Black American history, through these voices. So it's a one-man show, one voice is what I call it, and you're hearing these guys one at a time. And back then, 10 years ago, debut show, there's one voice, there's nobody else to blame it on, so it better be good. So 10 years later, I'm still rolling. So I still got a show, and now there's a lot of private events that I do, from corporate groups and schools, higher ed, to the little kids, where I'm becoming the embodiment of, what these people and these characters had to say about life, liberty, pursuit of happiness, all those kind of buzzwords that we think about in America, but what it was for the Black person's experience throughout time.
How long is your show, if you get to do like the ideal show, how long is that if it's live?
Yeah, so now there is an option for something a little bit different. It's been crazy in the last couple of months and years. So we have got a 90-minute show, basically, is what goes from then till now in the full length. So during that show, I believe I'm doing 5 different character voices. James Weldon Johnson, the Black Negro National Anthem, Fredrick Douglas, MLK, Muhammad Ali, and Barack Obama. So I'll do those 5 people, and in between there are video vignettes that show off and introduce where these people came from or how it ties together.
Right.
It gives me time to change my clothes backstage, you know? So during some of those, there's a couple of voices that are not me at all, but they are local, regular, everyday people. And now those people some are deceased, and some are in their upper years, and they talk about the struggle normally during the civil rights movement proper. And so they'll tell their story about an integration situation, about a police situation, and something like that. Yeah, so that is the show in its kind of full format.
Now, you mentioned, and hopping into some of the subject matter now, some pretty iconic names that a lot of people know: Fredrick Douglass, Martin Luther King Jr. What was it about these men that made you want to kind of embody them for a moment in your performance? What was it about that kind of like stuck out to you?
That's a great question, because we are all familiar with these icons, But what I'm doing is I'm recreating the experience for the audience member in its original form. So the audience member, through the video and all that stuff, I know you've gotten to experience the show, get to be an audience member in that person's presence back in 1963 at the Lincoln Memorial, something like that. So what happens is people are able to experience their passion, their energy, their emotions in its full form. It's not tweets, it's not memes, it's the whole deal. And it's so surprising to me, including myself when I was researching, because I knew MLK was going to be kind of like the central figure for my show. When I sat down to research and figure out how I was going to do this and put this show together, I realized I don't think I've ever heard the full speech. I don't think I've ever heard it.
Right. Not just you. Most people.
That's what
right?
I realized.
It's most people
Over
don't
the course of
understand.
10
There was a
years,
whole
like,
lot of speech.
I mean, this is good stuff. No wonder it's lit. But I'm like, I've never heard this. And it's not like it's super long or something. Watch a sitcom in 30 minutes, and MLK did the dream speech, the one that we all remember and heard of from school. He did it in 17 minutes. Right. You know, and I'm looking at it and I'm feeling it and I'm memorizing it, you know, those types of things going down, and I'm like, these are really powerful words and imagery, and understanding the contextual environment of the 50s and 60s or whenever, Fredrick Douglass, the 50s and 60s of the previous century, understanding the contextual environment became a big deal to me. And I said, you know, people have got to hear it from the people who put it together. They need to hear it from them. So it's the same feeling and thought process that I had as I was compiling the show with the recorded vignettes, those interview characters as well. I was like, man, this story is so powerful, but man, we can't be reading this in a textbook. You need to hear it from them. Yeah. And so that's kind of why I chose some of the people I did.
So, seeing your show, love the experience, love the performance, amazing. Like, I just got to
Thank
put
you.
that
Like I
out
said,
there.
one man, ain't nobody else to blame. If it don't work right,
Look, the lighting guy just
It's a good thing. It's a good thing, Jeremiah. You're really good at your job.
Perfect. Good.
But with that performance, because I mean, I honestly, like, when I watched it, I didn't see JDew.
Right.
You know,
Right.
which is great, and I imagine the audience will see that too. Bridging the gap here for modern day men, looking at mid-century men embodied by you. What is it you're hoping that gets instilled on them? What is it you're hoping that they can take away and maybe adapt to today?
Yeah, it's a great question. I really think that the main message in One Voice, which coincides really what you're doing, I think, here with Modern Man, is what can you do with your one voice to have a positive change in society, the people around you? Because the men who are so we think of some of the freedom fighters, the American icon freedom fighters, and I think of Fredrick Douglass and MLK in my story. What I'm having to remind people and remind myself is these guys were not icons in their day. They were regular dudes who saw a problem, saw injustice, saw issues, and they went for it because they thought it was right, morally, ethically, legally, whatever. You know, Martin Luther King always said, when God's law bumps up against man's law, I got to go with God's law. Peace, love, harmony, happiness, you know, all those things. And on top of that, the Founding Fathers wrote into the documents that we were supposed to have this. So there's two problems here, and we need to have that justice in our society. So I think the message is, Ted, what's going on in your life? Jonathan, what's going on in your life that you see injustice around you? You see inequality, you see problems. Your one voice can be just as powerful, and it needs to be. It's not about whether or not you create a legacy of memes after you're gone. Right. It's about impacting the people around you, your family, your friends, your community, you know, your own life, if necessary.
So, Jeremiah, two things I want to hear you talk more about, because you really encompass it so well. I love the fact you said, I don't offer commentary after my show. So I'd love to hear you talk about why you don't do that, but also the power of not offering commentary. Because we live in a world right now where everyone feels like they have to offer commentary.
Sure. And let me have an open letter to people who write open letters.
Open letters, right? I got an open letter to the open letter that I read on Facebook when they wrote right. But I want to hear you talk about the fact of why just listening to these words without commentary is so powerful. But that second piece is that they were normal people. Now they were prejudiced against. Sure. They were harmed. They were isolated, right? So hopefully people know that. But you're right, they were normal guys who said, hey, I'm going to do something. So talk about the power of, in our current culture, why that's also so important.
So yeah, when I first started 10 years ago doing my show, I take a bow at the end, and then I come up from the bow as JDew and smile and go home. And folks started asking me over time, especially in corporate environments first. Well, actually, it really probably came at the same time for educational institutions, kids, and all that. They said, hey, well, stay and answer some questions. And I was reluctant at first because I didn't want to, I felt that I didn't know enough about these men outside of these pieces that I was doing. First off, I'm not sure if I even know all the contextual pieces. I just know about this speech or this day or this small era in their life. But then I started to realize, man, these folks, people are really hungering for, what does this mean for us today? Modern man, what does it mean for us today? You know, because these guys are long gone, or it's ancient history or whatever. So nowadays there is a lot more opportunity for Q&A afterward, for panel discussion. But it's always JDew talking. It's not, I don't know exactly what MLK would have said here. I do know he wrote 5 books, and here's what's going on here and this and that, so I can guess. But, you know, if you're going to ask me, hey, well, the president said this or didn't say this or tweeted this or didn't tweet this, I can only contextualize it for you from a historical and current perspective. But I'm not going to, you know, come out of the box and say that this man would have done this or would have said this. I can only guess. And then to your second point, remind me, you were headed toward...
The fact they were normal guys.
Yeah.
They just stood up and used their one voice.
Right. So what's important to remember there is in both cases, when I talk about these two men, because they were so politically active, my show's not a political commentary, but they were politically active, is that what they were doing is very, very, very unpopular at the time. Very unpopular. And because of that, these men, Fredrick Douglas, we've got to remember, so in my story format, in my chapter in One Voice, he's the runaway. That's the character, that's the session, that's the piece. He was a fugitive, legally at that time. He had escaped being property, enslaved by the families, multiple families that had owned him over the course of his about 18, 19 years or whatever, when he ran away. He was a fugitive. So everything he said, everything he did, every speech that he made, it was a bullseye, a target, because he ran away from the Maryland area where he grew up to New York, and he traveled a lot. But he was under constant worry, at least in the back of his mind, that most of the abolitionist movement of the previous, mid-century modern man, the abolitionist movement of the North were white people, right? They were white people. Right. And so at any point, he could have been taken in by people who, took people to D.C. and got them back into slavery. You got paid for that type of thing. You know what I'm saying? There was fugitive acts. Yeah. There was all that stuff going on. And so let's fast forward to the past century, 20th century. Here is Martin Luther King, most hated man in America, voted most hated man in America in 1967. Right. This is the year before he was assassinated. This is way before everybody said, you know what, I'm going to go over to the monument and take my picture in my Lakers jersey or whatever and stand here. It's like, that's not how he was viewed in the mid-60s. So very unpopular issues. These were regular guys who decided, you know what, I'm going to use my voice for equality and justice. I'm going to challenge the government, challenge local leaders, challenge local ordinances, whatever they were that they were challenging, all sorts of things, because Fredrick Douglass was just as crazy. One of his main platforms later on in his life wasn't slavery, it was women's suffrage. It was for women to vote. He thought that was important. And, black, white, Native American, all those types, hey, women should be voting as well. Native Americans should be treated fairly as well. See, these are problems that were going on. These are not popular things. The whole indigenous population I'm sure, I don't think that's popular now.
Right, I was about to say, everything you just mentioned is
issues
currently unpopular,
today.
right?
Yeah, it's issues today, right?
Yeah.
So all that to say that these guys were sticking their neck out there for what they thought was right and good and fair, but wasn't even popular. They weren't doing it for applause. They were not rich people. They were not celebrity in the way we think of it.
They didn't.
Yeah.
The way I hear it, and they didn't set out to be people that are idolized.
No.
Yeah.
They just did what was right, and they did the best they could.
Of course, you got to remember, Dr. King was killed, was assassinated.
Right,
A lot of times, there's this narrative, and of course, in the world we hear today, it's like he was killed for this, and he died for this, and he died. He was killed. He was assassinated. Like, my man might still be living if he had a full term of life.
His 96th birthday just
92,
passed?
yeah, he'd be 92 as we speak today, if he was still living, and that's possible that he'd still be here.
Very much so. Now, and you mentioned, obviously, the activities that these men were doing actively put a target on their backs.
For sure.
And, I mean, in the case of Martin Luther King, you could honestly see the outcome of that. But to be so unpopular in a world that's hostile to you, you have to have some kind of support system around you, some kind of accountability system around you. So, to your best understanding, how did these men navigate those troubled waters? And how can we maybe learn ourselves in today's day and age to navigate the troubled waters? I mean, the waters are completely different. Now we're navigating Twitter waters and Facebook waters, social media and stuff.
Right.
But there's still the comparison of you have a target on your back, where do you go to ground you and keep you focused on the vision?
Man, these are great questions. So number one, I think that where my foundation is, and a lot of tangents from their foundation, was a biblical worldview. They had a thought about the way God had set things up, and they felt that they were accountable to him, both of them. You don't hear that much with Fredrick Douglass, but it was very much a part of some of the things that he said. Those rather obvious for Martin Luther King. He's a Baptist preacher by trade, right? But the other one is the accountability network that was around him. Dr. King very much, we see the iconic pictures at marches, wherever it was, Edmund Pettus, Selma to D.C. and all the places in between. He is interlocked arm in arm with his friends, with his family members.
Consistently his friends. You can see it in the pictures.
Yeah.
It's the same people.
Yeah, we got John Lewis right here. We got Abernathy right here, right? We got A. Philip Randolph right here. He was with those guys. Jesse Jackson. So those folks were a part of the echo chamber and sounding board about continue to fight the fight. Go for it and stick with the plan. So these people were not Lone Rangers. And that's the thing, we get idolized later on and you get heroized later on. Hitler, on the opposite side of the spectrum, had a group. He had his guys. And Martin Luther King is no different. He had his guys. Fredrick Douglass was with the abolitionist movement. He was with Abraham Lincoln and the cabinet members and some of those secretaries that were chatting during the wartime. He was with those guys to help keep the movement going. So these guys were not speaking on behalf of all, they were, but it's not that it was only on their personal conviction, but they were speaking on behalf of the movement as well. They were the spokespeople for the movement, but there was other people in that movement network that they were with. And so how that translates today is, who's in your corner, right?
Yeah.
Who's in your corner? Who's on your team? Who's your coach and your trainer and the people who help you remember what track to stay on, and remember where you're trying to go.
It's amazing, too, because you mentioned the people that were in Martin Luther King Jr.'s corner, and, those are names that still resonate today.
Right.
And when you mention who's in your corner and who you surround yourself with, your team, though Martin Luther King gets that recognition, you said not a Lone Ranger, the team is still in their own right having their own recognition there, and they continue to carry that torch forward, right? So it's about being a part of something bigger than yourself.
100%.
How does somebody tap into that? I think nowadays, in today's day and age, we have a lot of things going around us that a lot of people feel passionate about. And when we talk about modern man, we've talked a lot about responsibility, right? And the responsibility in our own world, the responsibility in our household and things around us as well. How do we take up a mantle of responsibility for something bigger than us? And where do we start finding those people in our corner?
Yeah, well, one thing that's great about the internet is you can find a subgroup for everything, right? And that's
Even
also
if
the
they're
terrible
telling
thing.
lies.
Yes, that's the terrible thing about the internet, right, and social media. But one thing that I think you have to do is you have to spend some time by yourself to figure out what the mission is and what you're trying to be. Because I think it's easy. Most people are followers. Most people are followers right? There's some people I follow on Instagram, but most people are following me, right? There's a difference there with who is who. And you've got to realize most people are going to, in most categories, are just going to be followers. I'm going to be a follower of Will Smith. I'm just going to be a follower. And he's a thought leader for certain types of entertainment and things like that, right? But what are the things that I feel that I'm passionate about, and where can I have an influence there and find that group of people? So one thing for me, it's really important to consider as a self-employed type of guy and a type A or a go-getter is I can't spend all of my free time being entertained. I got so many people and friends out there, they spend their excess time, the time that they haven't sold to somebody else for a W-2, just being entertained. Well, you're not going to make an impact being entertained. Like my network, my personal board of trustees, all it is we talk about Bridgerton or whatever. You know what I'm saying? Like that's not going to do anything for you. There's a time and place for entertainment, of course, but I think you really need to find some people when you share your vision and share your thoughts who, number one, can resonate with that, and number two, they can help you move forward. That's a big deal, because there are some people out there, we all got moms, I guess, you know. My mom's going to love my vision and support it. She's not going to help me move forward. That's not my mom's job. She's going to cheer me on for whatever I do. She doesn't have the same passions that I have, but she enjoys me. I enjoy my mother, but I've got to find some people who can maybe support what I think is important as well.
I love that. Freedom. Obviously, that's what these men were chasing. I think a lot of what people are chasing today with entrepreneur, you talked about working for yourself and just the entrepreneurship or whatnot. There's, financial freedom. You hear this word freedom, and I think it can mean something different depending on who you talk to and the context in which you're talking about it. What was freedom defined as for these men, and how is that definition different today for what we're chasing, or is it still the same?
That's deep. That's deep. Well, first off, I think kind of the definition, you can get a lot of different definitions, but the definition of freedom is the ability to not be restrained by outside forces. So I think that's also a very close definition to the word liberty, which is more of like an Americana type word. Yeah. But I think they're very similar in the context we're talking about. So freedom and liberty. And founding fathers, Martin Luther King, Fredrick Douglas, liberty and freedom in that type of context normally meant the ability to be able to live the life in a way that you want to live your life. Life, liberty, pursuit of happiness. And I think a lot of times when we think about founding fathers, particularly Thomas Jefferson, little George Washington right there.
Lil.
Right. Big George, 6'2" and 6'3", I think it was, those two guys. But is these men were attempting to, John Adams said, second president, I believe John Adams, he said, you know what, the reason that I study war and politics is so my son can study art and literature.
Which, solving problems of the solution, right? Yeah. We just got to, the last conversation was what problems we need to solve so we don't leave them as an inheritance for our kids to have to solve, which goes, right, John Adams said, we're going to solve these things so my kids can do this.
Yeah, so I think what these men were trying to do and what America, the intent of the liberty of America, we got to remember, as checkered as the issue is when it comes to race relations and some of those politics, is it was the idea to not be inhibited as a person from an outside force like the government, so it was going to enrich the lives of the few or the one or the crown. So I have my own space, my own land, my own family, my own opportunities, and I can do whatever I want with that. But the difference, I think, from today, as you asked, with a lot of people that I think I know and that I'm around, and some of the more kind of large rhetoric, is that liberty is the freedom to do nothing. Right? Rather than the freedom. These men were using the liberty and freedom to be very disciplined with themselves, very disciplined. These people started a war with the most powerful force on the planet, beat them, got them to surrender, at least, got them to surrender at some point, and then they went home and farmed acres and acres and built things and read and wrote books.
Yeah.
Like, that's not what I think most of my friends are thinking liberty and freedom is. I think it's completely different. And so there's, I think, a too much reliance on an outside force, like a government entity or government program, rather than the inner responsibility. Yeah. And so that's where I'm going to have to sit on that. It's not going to be for everybody, but I got to.
Don't hit the dislike button.
Okay, so I'm going to ask a question based on something Jeremiah said so that he tells a story I want him to tell. Okay, so can I be fair? Like, at least I'm being honest, right? You talked about this idea of the discipline to do nothing, right? They were disciplined to do nothing, but in their nothingness, they did something. They made a choice to say, hey, I'm not going to go with what everyone else is doing. I'm going to do this, which looked like nothing, right? They're going to go home, take care of it, right? It looked like nothing. Right. And I just want to, talk about something very relevant right now, right? There's been a lot of protests, especially after Mr. Floyd's death. And you took your kids to a rally, and you didn't take signs.
Yes, right.
And I feel like that is in line with what you just said. You didn't do what everyone else was doing, but you had a really important lesson for your kids, which I think is important for the men listening right now to understand what you said to your children that day, that, hey, you don't have a sign, but here's the reality. I'd love for you to share that story.
Yeah, so of course, we all kind of were sitting at home in a pandemic quarantine semi-state during George Floyd issues of the last week of May, first week of June 2020. And in Greenville, where I live in my town, there was the protest march, and they were all across the country. And ours was relatively peaceful here, as they were in most parts of the country, of course. But I took my kids down. Actually, my wife and her parents were also going to be a part of this day. It was their anniversary, May 31st, I believe, and that was the afternoon of the protest march. So we went down, and my children are at the time 6, 4, and 1, girl, boy, and a baby boy. We go down, and we're going to participate. We're going to march. And my in-laws decided to be a part of this, and their uncle, my wife's brother, and my wife are all going down. And these are white people. And they felt something inside of them that they should be a part of this too. Great. It's going to be wonderful. So we're walking up and down the street, and my kids are wondering what's going on. We're not getting into all the pieces of the puzzle for little children, So they're wondering what people are yelling and shouting, and what does that sign say, and all that type of thing, right? The first thing that kind of hit me in that exchange, in that time, was watching the majority dominant culture participate in this, where I think there's a lot of people who look like me or look like Ted over the course of 400 years of American structure. Like, this type of behavior that we're witnessing and going through isn't new, but it was very new to see so many dominant culture people, non-brown and black people, participate in solidarity with the African American community. Wow. That was one thing. And watching my family members, so now I got in-laws, watching them try to explain to their brown grandkids, my kids, what was going on. Well, why is everybody upset? My kids ask. Their grandparents, white people, say, well, see, there is, and I saw them try to form the idea for the first time in their mind, loving great-grandparents, trying to form the idea that these kids, this is a racial issue and there's a divide between me and my own grandson or whatever. And watching them go through that in their brain. And I'm thinking, well, because for me, I'm thinking this is how it is. It's not something that you change. It's not a choice. Yeah. This isn't an orientation. This is God made me to be this way. Right. I didn't choose anything, and there's parts of the system that are already set up to not be so favorable if you pay attention. And watching them go through that, very, very interesting. And so we had a lot of family time to think through something. We didn't know what to say to each other, but we were looking at each other differently because
I love you.
Because we're all doing this game because we're realizing what's going on. Right. So my kids are yelling things on the signs, we need you, we got you, all these things that people are cheering, and yelling throughout the half a mile march or so. downtown, and my kids get upset because we didn't bring a sign. I was like, what does that sign say? What does that sign say? And why did we bring a sign? And it was an interesting post that I put up afterward. We took a family picture downtown together because I told the kids, we are the sign.
That's right.
Black and brown and old and young and together, showing off what neighborliness can be, what community should look like. You know what, guys? I think we are the sign. This is it, and we're here, and we're participating.
Yes.
That's the perfect segue into this question about, we mentioned these men who are revered and the embodiment of them that you do in one voice, right? However, there's so many more layers to JDew, more than just the one voice performance in your everyday life. How is the way you carry your life, the way someone watching carries their life, how can we embody some of those values, those principles today as a modern man?
And I think that's the journey that we're all trying to figure out. It's how do we live our lives today? That are what should it be? What is manhood? What is manliness, right? And all those types of things. And one thing that I think we have to remember, and this may seem elementary, especially to the audience that you've already built, is it starts here. It doesn't start with other people's definition. It shouldn't do that. They should be a part of that conversation, but it can't just be based on what happens outwardly. The reason I say that is because outwardly, even in a place like Greenville, South Carolina, where I live, outwardly in community, it was legal to be racist in business until 1964 and 5. That's what the community, mores of the community were. That's not okay. Now, not everybody behaved on those platforms mentally, but on the platform of ordinances in communities all across the South in America and places like that, it was fine. It was culturally relevant to be racist in business and education and all sorts of things.
Everything,
right? Anything you want.
Everything.
So, I don't think that's right. I don't think that's good. So you need to find what that foundation is. And I think the foundation. I made a video at the march for the George Floyd situation, downtown Greenville in 2020, and what I took was the current situation that our community was going through and our world was going through, the George Floyd situation, and I backed it up and I married that to one of the speeches that I do in my show that Dr. King did, his final speech. So his final speech in 1968 was the mountaintop speech that he gave in Memphis the night before he was assassinated. And I recited lines of the speech and then interposed words that he said. And so you hear him, you hear me, you see me walking down the street. And what happens is we realize in that particular story, Dr. King, 1968, he's saying the reason that I've showed up in Memphis to help the sanitation workers, remember that story from high school and all that, I've showed up to help the sanitation workers is because of this one anecdotal story 2,000 years ago that the master teacher told. It's a parable from the Bible where Jesus talks about the Good Samaritan. The whole point of the story was that somebody sees somebody else of a different race hurting, needing help on the side of the road after 2 other religious people had already passed.
Who would have associated with them.
Right, who were of the same
the same.
race, the same ethnic group, but they moved on. And this third person walks by, different race, sub-race probably seen to the religious people. And this person gets down from his beast and stops to help, puts the person on and takes him to health and safety, nurses the person back to health. And the idea behind that, a couple ideas. One is, we need to check in with our neighbor on how to be neighborly. I can have tons of opinions and write open letters to people who write open letters on Facebook, but I'm not sure if they're my neighbors or not. But you're my neighbor, and you're my neighbor because the point of that story at the end is this person asked Jesus, or Jesus asked them, who was the neighbor? Because the person was asking Jesus, well, I love God and love people. Like, who am I looking for to love out here? And Jesus said, well, who are you missing? Was the idea. Jesus was not impressed with religiosity. he wasn't impressed with the people who went to church. I mean, very possibly the two people that he names are headed off to a church meeting. They're like church workers. And Jesus was trying to say, I'm really not impressed with that idea. Who here was the good person? It was the person who stopped to help his neighbor. And over the course of 2020, you remember early in the quarantine, we were supposed to check on our neighbors, right? Check on our elderly neighbors and our invalid friends and things like that to see how they're doing in your communities, right? When we're all in the houses, late spring 2020. And, I think we need to do that today as well. It's not a political game. I need to check on my own neighbors and see what's going on. I can't solve every problem in Atlanta and Washington, D.C., in Minnesota. I can't solve every problem in Africa and Japan, but I can be a part of something and influential in my home, in my neighborhood, in my community.
Yeah. I wish we had more time. I really do.
Always.
We might have to make this longer at some point in time, but JDew, there are so many more questions I want to ask you. I definitely want to make sure folks can contact you and get in touch with you and experience the One Voice show themselves, because a lot of what we just talked about in this episode, a lot of the principle, the values that we would hope that anyone watching can maybe instill in their own lives, search within themselves, find their mission, and then go out, set forth, be unpopular, if you would, and really kind of make the world a better place. That all starts with inspiration. How can folks get a glimpse at some of that?
Very good. Well, I hope they can get it hanging out with me somewhere in town, wherever they are.
Pick a
I
spot.
hope. First off,
You're around town. People can find you.
Great. But to experience my show and the embodiment of some of these stories, because now this is the commentary. You've now got the commentary. You've now come see the actual words, if you'd like. OneVoiceShow.com. The word onevoiceshow.com and at It's JDew on several of the platforms which you all like and love. This is where you can find me, and look forward to bringing my show to a lot of different groups for great discussion. And really what my experience does is just helps people start the conversation back at home.
Hey, I know you're about to close, but I'm going to interrupt. Is that okay? One of the things, Jeremiah said it, what can your one voice do, right? What can your one voice do? And some of your listeners in the Modern Man are white. They look like me, right? And they're listening to all the wrong sources. So if you're in the upstate of South Carolina, you have access to Jeremiah and Ted. Okay? You got access to other people who've been on Modern Man who are people of color. And one of the best ways you can love your neighbor is buy them a cup of coffee and listen to their story. And I feel like more people like me have listened to the wrong side of stories, and I would just say error stories. So I just want to encourage the Modern Man listeners, if you are in South Carolina, you've got people to reach out to. If you're across the country, you need to reach out to people who don't look like you to hear their story, because the only way to be a really good neighbor right now is hear someone's story. And don't discount it, and don't believe the BS. Okay? Because a bunch of white people in the room have no idea what it's like to be a person of color in this country. So you got to hear their stories. And I'm grateful for Jeremiah. I'm grateful for Ted, people I call my friends, for being willing to tell your story. And then, because I know both of you, willing to sit down with people who don't know it and share it in such an empathetic and compassionate way. So for both of you, thank you so much.
Jonathan, hey, love you, brother.
It, man.
Thank you. Absolutely. And appreciate you being a panelist today. Appreciate you being with us. JDew.
My man.
I can't thank you enough.
Yes, sir.
Not just for everything you do, but being on the show today. And I know a lot of the viewers are probably going to be reaching out, hoping to catch a glimpse of that show.
Hope so.
And even maybe follow you around town and see if you're going to throw them a t-shirt or not, man.
Maybe
might
at the
still
next
be-
game.
Do you
Real
have a
salty.
cannon, the t-shirt cannon
You can't
gun?
hold the microphone and the cannon at the same time.
So you got somebody else doing the cannon.
Cannons for somebody else. Yeah.
So listen to JDew at the Clemson games, but find the cannon.
There you go. Find the tiger, find a cheerleader. Yeah.
That's who you want to get in with.
That's how you get the shirt.
Yeah.
Well, JDew, thank you. And to the viewers, thank you so much for rocking with us through this. I got to break down some of the nuggets from along the way, because there was so much value to take here. But first and foremost, before I even look at my notes, I just want to pour into you and let you know that whatever mission that is boiling up within inside of you, it is meant to come out. Don't suppress it. Don't hold it back. Let it out. And just looking down at my notes, it's about impact. It's about the impact you have on the world. It's about the legacy you leave, and your kids are watching, your friends are watching, your circle is watching, and who is in your circle? Who's in your corner? As JDew said before, these are not lone wolves. These men that we read about in history books, these women we read about in history books that make history, they did not do it by themselves. So make sure you have the network and you have the support group that is necessary and that is going to push you forward. What's the mission? A lot of us don't know the mission. There are so many missions to take up right now, and they're all great missions. But what's yours? A lot of us are followers. What are you going to lead? That's the one question I want to challenge you all with. And coming down to the bottom of my notes, because there are so many that you're going to have to watch this again to get really all the value, but the Good Samaritan, the one who stepped out, helped somebody out, check on your neighbor. If there's one thing you can take away from this episode, it's turn this off, pick up your phone, check on a loved one, check on a friend, check on a neighbor, see how they're doing, see what their story is, see what they're struggling with. That's the very first thing you could do to try and make this world a better place. Hope you guys got value from this. Love you all. Enjoy and go out there and be a modern man.